Sandy, it's very nice to meet you. Thank you for the honor of being able to interview all of you guys today.
I hope it's fun. I'm expecting it to be.
Dude, I had the most fun over the last 2 days. Calder is amazing, right? And we'll talk about it when we start off. Audrey will give me the kickoff later on, but I spent the last 2 days, while I haven't been fortunate enough, like many others, to have been able to join the Calder Question. I spent the last 2 days immersing myself in Calder and even watching that documentary, Sculptor of Air. I was telling Audrey, I can't even count the number of times that what your grandfather was saying brought a huge smile to my face. It's just a real honor to be able to interview all of you today.
Thank you. Did you watch that in French, Sculptor of Air?
I wish I spoke French, and I do speak multiple Asian languages, but I did have to watch a translated English version.
Wait, you're giving away a few pointers on who you are. You better be careful.
Pseudonymous. All right. So I'm excited to do this. I've been immersing myself in Calder since Audrey spoke to me about the possibility of being able to interview everybody on these Twitter spaces. Audrey, I don't know if you want to let a few more minutes for people to filter in, or if you want me to start off. I'm going to mute myself until you decide to start, and then after that, we can get this party started.
I think we can get going. I feel like we can get going. It's all good with you.
Sounds good. Great. So it's 11 p.m. Hong Kong, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I'm honored to be hosting TRLab's session on their latest and greatest collaboration with the Calder Foundation, the Calder Question. It's been a hot minute since I was last able to join a Twitter space, so it really is a privilege to do one with such immense legacy today. Unless all of you guys have been living under a rock for the last few months, it's been spectacular to see the run-up and the participation to this monumental event that has brought the work of one of the most significant creatives of the 20th century to Web3. While many of you have undoubtedly heard of Alexander Calder, for those of you who have not, he is best known as one of the pioneers of kinetic art and the mobile, although as many of you have learned from this journey with TRLab and the Calder Foundation, this is but one of the many creative legacies he has left us with. I am truly honored to have been invited to host this Twitter space today, and joining me is Alexander Raoul, or Sandy, grandson of Calder, and president of the Calder Foundation, CEO and co-founder of TRLab, Audrey O, and Raoul Marks, the amazing two-time Emmy Award-winning artist who worked with the group to bring Calder's work to Web3. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to host Twitter spaces with all of you today.
Good morning, good afternoon.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. So I thought I have a list of questions that I'd like to go through today. And, as I was saying earlier on before we started off this Twitter space, since Lee Sin and Audrey reached out to me about 2 months ago, I've been finding the time to immerse myself and get to know a little bit more about Calder. So for everyone who doesn't know, a lot of collectors in Web3, we started off digitally, and we find this way to move backwards into traditional art and all aspects of art. So it's been a very rewarding experience for me. Sandy, as I was saying just now, I spent a lot of time over these last 2 days. Have been excitedly emailing and messaging Audrey and Sin about the process. So what I'd like to do today is really take this interview from a Web3 angle and really get an update, as well as some of your thoughts, everybody's thoughts actually, on the way that this has proceeded. So undoubtedly so today, unlike maybe some of the other interviews you guys might have had, there will be a lot of fresh new faces from the whale community, as well as other citizens of Web3. So perhaps start with a very brief introduction from each guest. For these newcomers, we can start with Sandy, we'll go to Audrey, and after that we'll go to Raoul. But Sandy, would you like to start with a very short introduction before we move on to the other two?
Sure, absolutely. I'm Sandy Raoul. My grandfather was the great sculptor and artist Alexander Calder. I started the Calder Foundation 35 years ago. I work on it every single day. I do about 60 hours a week on Calder Foundation things. Mostly it's exhibitions people know about. But we're involved with many, many different aspects of legacy legacy issues, including, copyrights, fraud, all the different kinds of things you could imagine. And I think the best introduction I can give is to say that we're the first artists, great artist legacy group that's really moved into Web3 in any kind of meaningful way. We decided not to be fearful, and we decided to do something that we thought could be fun and meaningful. There's my intro.
That's a wonderful introduction, Sandy. And once again, very honored to meet you. I've heard a ton about you from Audrey and Sin. This is just going to be a very exciting conversation. I guess the next person that should introduce themselves is Audrey. And I'm sure, if you guys are familiar with TRLab, you know Sin, you know Audrey. But Audrey, I'm sure that there are some new listeners out there. Do you want to give them a short introduction into yourself as well as TRLab?
Sounds great. Thank you so much, WhaleShark, for having us on today. My name is Audrey. I'm the CEO and co-founder of TRLab. We are a fine art NFT platform, and our mission is to fuse NFT technology with fine art knowledge to pioneer a new way of collecting. And I felt very privileged to work with both Calder Foundation, Sandy, as well as Raoul. And I'm so happy to be on this space today with both of them. I think it's actually the first time we've ever been on a Twitter space all together.
Dude, I am so honored to be the person that gets to host all three of you guys at one time. And I assure you today will be interesting, but hopefully I've arranged some thought-provoking questions that won't be so easy. So I hope everyone has a lot of fun with this. Raoul, my friend, huge fan of your work, prestigious two-time Emmy Award winner designer. Raoul, do you want to give a brief introduction to the crowd before we begin with the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. I am sort of an artist designer. I work in film and TV as my day job, making title sequences for shows like The Crown, Westworld, True Detective, a few others as well. But that's generally what I've been doing, predominantly with a company called Antibody, but that's what takes up my day. And then at other points over the last 2 years, I've been sort of getting deeply involved in the NFT Web3 space. And I guess that's what brought me into working on the Calder Question, is my involvement on that side, and then making work for myself as an NFT artist.
Raoul, I am so excited to talk to you as well as have ask you some questions, particularly when you're dealing with a creative, an artist, a visionary with so much legacy. I believe this is the very first time that I will have the opportunity to talk about someone who is working with a foundation, working with a platform, working with a legacy, and transitioning that into Web3. I find it absolutely fascinating. But we will definitely get to those questions later on in the Twitter space. Essentially, this space will run anywhere between 45 minutes to 60 minutes. Now, given that, I do have a list of questions that I will be taking our guests through. But at the same time, I do want to make sure that the audience, if you do have any questions, would be more than happy to bring you guys up. Now, just as a preface to being able to do that, I think most of you are very well aware of the way that I do host these Twitter spaces. Feel free to come up and ask a question. Feel free to come up and compliment our guests. However, there are three major things that if you are brought up that I would not like to see, and I will take you off the stage immediately. That's the first thing. Please don't launch into a 5-minute soliloquy. The second thing is please don't chill. And the third thing is make sure that you're respectful. All right. So for any of you guys who do want to come up and ask a question, I might interject between the questions I have, but feel free to raise your hand and either the TRLab account or myself will actually bring you up to stage. All right. Now, given those introductions, again, I think everyone is aware of how important and how prestigious this Twitter space is going to be. But, again, we've been talking about Calder, talking about TRLab. For those of you who, very similar to me, who've been traveling or have been working and haven't had the opportunity to immerse yourself in this wonderful project, the first question that I actually have for Audrey, and again, Sandy, Raoul, feel free to jump in if you guys have anything to add. But Audrey, can you give the audience a brief rundown of what is the Calder Question? And I think the question that I had, Audrey, is why is it a question?
So I actually would love to hear Sandy's take on the name and why we chose the Calder Question. But it was really very short. Calder Question is really a choose your adventure type of educational orientation that aims to take people through Calder's art and his life. And the first chapter that we're doing is an exploration focus on mobiles, which will really be a journey that will highlight Calder's mastery of multiple art forms. But the reason why we picked Calder Question as a name, I believe, was because there's no easy way to define what it is. Like, what are you trying to say by a question? Are you trying to pose a question about Calder, or are you trying to say that you will learn about Calder and get more answers through the experience? But I think the credit of the name it's all from Sandy, and this is just my interpretation of it, and I think how other people in our community have interpreted the name too.
Well, one of the things in the art world, before we entered the Web3 space, Calder was this gigantic, celebrated artist in the art world. And one of the things I was always encountering was people who thought they had the answers about Calder. So posing the question about Calder that's kind of what I always do. I always tell people when I give them a tour of an exhibition in a museum, or when they visit at the Calder Foundation, or wherever I might encounter them, I say, please forget everything you think you know about Calder, and now let's begin. And that means that, it's like clearing the slate, like starting fresh, and tabula rasa. I love that tabula rasa reference to TRLab, because Calder's kind of an enigma. We don't realize how tremendously, phenomenally disruptive he was in his life. In the 1920s, inventing a whole entire medium, wire sculpting, taking a wire and drawing three-dimensionally in space, and getting rid of mass, getting rid of bronze and marble and clay and stone and all the stuff that preceded him for thousands of years. He totally broke the mold. And so asking the question is always kind of the beginning. So there it is.
That's a wonderful answer from both of you. Again, I do have a very large question, and I'm not sure whether Audrey shared that.
Is it whale size?
Pardon?
Is it a whale size question?
It is the bigger question in terms of what is the answer, but what is the answer to the question, Sandy? And I am going to ask that to all three of you later on in the Twitter space. But again, I think, watching, and again, I cannot reiterate how fun it was to watch this documentary. You guys can find it. You guys can find the English version on YouTube. It's called Alexander Calder, Sculptor of Air. I thought it was going to be a dry documentary, but I was literally, riveted to my seat for the 49, 50 minutes that it ran. And you cannot imagine the number of times that I smiled during that documentary. Again, I don't know, Sandy, I don't know if that documentary is sanctioned by the Calder Foundation, but I found it to be a very humane and an extremely fun look at Calder's growth, Calder's life, and the purpose or non-purpose of his art. It was a wonderful documentary. Go ahead, Sandy.
I should tell you, there are 50 movies on Calder. That was one produced by a wonderful French filmmaker. I haven't actually watched in English, so I'm not sure like what the experience is. But there are so many films, and I would even say the one that doesn't give you the biography of Calder is maybe the closer way to connect to his artwork and what his message is, what he's communicating. There's a movie called Works of Calder. It's from 1950, and that was an incredible production because it shows some aspects of nature, and you question like, well, is Calder coming from nature? And by the end of it, you realize, wait, he's not coming from nature. He's like parallel to nature. His work is mysteriously coming from kind of the ether. You can find that on our website. You can find that on YouTube, Works of Calder. And there are many other great films too.
Undoubtedly so. I agree with you. Probably every single biography regarding Calder, again, it's shaped in the lens of the director, of the producer. But I can say this. I mean, something that struck me. I guess before I move on to a more detailed question about the Calder question for Audrey, one of the things that really struck me was, really the humanity that I guess Sculptor of Air decided to inject into Calder's life during that documentary, and talked about how Calder really wanted people to interact with his sculptures, and I think they brought up an instance, and I believe it was his first exhibition in the MoMA, whereby when he actually had launched everything, people were going around, they were touching his sculptures, and security guards were saying, "Hey, don't touch that, don't touch that." Whereas, Calder himself was saying, "Touch it as much as you want," right? And I guess I just want to say that that really brought a smile to my face because, again, at the end of the day, art is there to be appreciated, but art is also there to be explored. Art is also there for people to find their own meaning. And, again, part of that is interacting with that art. But Audrey, you spoke about, this is a very unique experience versus anything available in the NFT world today. You talked about a journey. Can you delve a little bit more, I guess, in a structured format in terms of what was the Calder question and where are we at the moment with the Calder question?
Yes, so we are very happy to take that question. We are just coming up to the end of chapter 1 for the Calder question, which was focused on mobiles. But what it was, where we actually launched with an educational portal that the foundation had kindly supplied us with materials for. That was really, it's still live on calderquestion.trlab.com. You can click through, interact with it, and experience it. There was also a quiz that opened up that about 1,200 people passed through. And it was a very difficult quiz with non-Googleable answers that were about Calder's life and his legacy, especially focused around mobiles. But if you'd gone through the educational experience that is available, you actually would have gotten a full score. So around 1,200 people passed through and submitted that experience, which was wonderful to see. And the average score, I know Sandy still thinks it's a little bit low, but I was impressed by the average score being 75%, given the difficulty of the questions, as well as the number of people who wrote very moving essays about how they feel about Calder's work as part of their submission. Right now, so the quiz phase is closed. We're actually right towards the end of what we call the assembling phase, where after you pass through the quiz, you'd be able to mint a free NFT that's called a non-space NFT, which is taken from elements of mobiles. You would then work either in a group or individually to identify which mobile your non-space NFT belongs to, as well as what are the other correct elements of this mobile. After you successfully assemble their 5 pieces of the puzzle, you're then rewarded with access to the foundation, with part of the rewards also being ability to access Raoul, Mark, and Calder Foundation's amazing artwork on mobiles at a pre-sale special price.
Can I add something about the test? I want to the kind of like quiz in the beginning. Sin and Audrey were talking about this whole new idea they had, which was, educational, and that there would actually be a test. And I said to Audrey, "Okay, wait a second, that is so cool. Why don't you make a test? Come up with some questions that I can't pass. Like, ask me ask me 5, ask me 10, write them down, Calder questions. I'm gonna try and answer them without doing any research, just from my head. Give me a test I can't pass, and then let's see how difficult we can make it." And of course, that whole concept totally failed, because I do have this ridiculous encyclopedic knowledge of Calder's life and his work. So that was just kind of a weird standard. I thought I guess it was just amusing myself. But in the end, I do think that the quiz is really, it's not so difficult if you actually do the work, but if you don't do the work, it's basically impossible. So I expected all 1,200 people to, I expected an average of like 90, not 75, Audrey.
Dude, I think as we move forward and as more people get immersed in this, I think it will be amazing to see. I mean, I can tell you this. based on and I wasn't even able, again, I've been traveling over the last 2 months, and, I'm definitely going to take part in the next one, but I didn't have the opportunity to immerse myself as much as everyone who was fortunate enough to be in this project. But undoubtedly so, Sandy, during chapter 2, I'm going to take these tests. Hopefully I'll score more than a 75. And then when we do this again, I'll be able to tokenize a quiz with 100% A++ answer sheet for you.
Okay, Audrey, we're going to have a harder quiz just for WhaleShark.
Oh, dear.
Okay, we'll design a quiz just for you, WhaleShark.
Audrey, special credit if I buy the NFTs. I'm kidding. All right. So I want to. So it actually brings me up to my next question, right? And Sandy, I want to tell you this. There were 2 instances where I smiled while investigating and while immersing myself in Calder. The first time was when I did watch again that documentary called Sculptor of Air. But the second time that I smiled was when I was watching your interview with Adam Lindman, right? Yourself and Raoul, and your response to what is the purpose of the Calder question, really struck a chord in my heart, right? Because right now in NFT land, right, in Web3, we exist in an environment where people buy something and sell it for something higher, right? People buy people, or a lot of people buy NFT art, hold it or might not even hold it, and then flip it. That pertains to not only NFTs but monkeys and all of these other things that are coming up. There was a very, very different impetus and different goal for you to bring Calder into Web3. So my question for you, and again, I know that you've answered this to some degree during that video interview, but for the audience, what was the impetus or source of inspiration to bring Calder's work into Web3, and what exactly did you want to achieve, my friend?
Well, I have no idea what I said with Raoul and Adam in Paris, because I don't have any canned answers. I don't have a list of 12 answers to give. So I have no idea what I said. But the impetus, we had 12 serious proposals to do Calder NFTs, which was basically a way to mint some money. And we had no interest in that. We were interested in how to engage people, not the lip service of building community nonsense, but the actual idea that you could build a broader community beyond the community that we know, that we are very, very accessible to the art world, to the art community. We do Calder shows all over the world. We do 12 projects a year all over the world. We have 2.5 million visitors to our projects. We're very engaged. Those are real in-person visitors. It's huge what we do, but yet there are wonderful communities that are not served by us, that don't know who Calder is, or do know who Calder is, but still are not connected to Calder, because they don't realize that Calder has this connection to them. And the Web3 experience, this sort of extra dimensional experience, is something that is part of our DNA. It's part of our evolution. And we can't deny that anymore. It's part of the future. So I think Calder working as a multi-dimensional artist, and I don't mean working within the 3 dimensions. I mean working beyond the 3 dimensions. Obviously, the 4th dimension, if you think the 4th dimension is time, that was something he engaged very actively with vibration and movement. But then the dimensions beyond that, the more esoteric, the more far out stuff. And when I realized that Web3 was really another dimensional experience, sort of off to this, instead of a linear going up higher dimension, the 5th dimension, the 9th dimension, but that Web3 was kind of a different direction, dimensional experience, I thought it was really important that Calder should be part of that and that we should engage it. So Audrey and Sin brought us this kind of whole proposal about how to get engaged with people who may or may not know Calder, but maybe they're not going to museums, maybe they are going to museums, don't really know who the people are. But we know that they're intelligent, we know they're interested in things beyond the hard and fast rules of the 3 dimensions, so it was really intriguing. In our first conversation, which was only actually just a little bit less than 1 year ago, our first real engaged conversation about how Calder could enter Web3, and it wasn't really even so much an NFT discussion. It was more like how does Calder get out there and get out in front, in front of all the other great artist foundations in the States that are kind of hiding and being careful and fearful about making a mistake. So they really inspired me that it was okay to go out, and it's okay to make a mistake. I don't think we made any mistakes, or if we made them, they weren't so big in this round. Hopefully we'll try harder to make bigger mistakes next time.
Amazing. And Sandy, that was the exact on topic as you replied to Adam back in your live interview in Paris. Again, I think at the end of the day, so many people in NFT land tend to do things for the flip. They tend to do things for the money. They tend to do things, for all of those more capitalist approaches. Whereas I was really struck not only by your answer today, but also by your answer during that interview, which brought a smile to my face because, you basically said, it's wonderful if these pieces sell, but in essence, the main thing about this is making sure that we're sharing Calder with the next generation, right? And a next area or segment of people who should get to know Calder's work. And I do thoroughly believe that you guys managed to achieve that not only by bringing Calder's work to the forefront as digital art pieces, but also by providing them with this wonderful journey in education that has only just begun with chapter 1. Sorry, Sandy, I saw you on mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I would just wanted to add that this consideration of blowing Calder out dimensionally. When TR brought me Raoul and said, "Hey, what do you think about this guy?" I was like, "Well, I know his work. It's really intimidating and scary to think about an artist engaging Calder's imagery and making a third thing, a new thing. All the kind of misconceptions that can happen with somebody with Calder. That's why I like to start at zero, get rid of all the things you think you know." But all the conversations were with Raoul. We would have like these calls with Raoul's in Australia. I was in New York, and my team and the TRLab team, like there'd be 10, 12 people on the call. And Raoul and I would go deep about, the nature of the universe and the meaning of life. And Raoul would just, he calmed me down. He had his own nervous things, which I want Raoul to speak now because, he had his own stuff to go through. We both had our different theoretical challenges. I think at the end, we're both really happy. I sure am.
That's amazing. Raoul, please go ahead, my friend.
Yeah, I feel like I should jump in there. Yeah, look, of course, at the very beginning, when I was having conversations with Audrey and the rest of the TRLab folks, it's a pretty interesting challenge. Like there was a trepidation there because you're really being asked to kind of start a conversation with a god of the art world. Like to be, artists have a certain sort of sacrosanct sort of space, territory. You don't want to kind of step into someone else's thing. And obviously the legacy of Calder is so huge. The idea of like, do you want to do, we couldn't even kind of, it's hard to get to describe exactly what this is exactly. Is it an interpretation? Is it a conversation? Is it a Calder? Is it a me? Is it something else? All those kind of questions are quite complicated. And I don't think there's even really very clear answers to it. So it was, scary going into it. And we didn't really know, like, a lot of things when I'm working on a project, you have a pretty clear brief, but I think the brief was pretty open-ended with this from the beginning, and we just needed to have a lot of conversations. And those conversations did sort of tend to lead into kind of conversations about the nature of the universe and, what our understandings and of perception are and, how atoms work, like the space between atoms, all these kind of things that we've ended up being quite fascinating conversations, quite probably perverse to like the 20 other people on some of these calls, but maybe quite important for us to kind of, very much at the beginning, feel each other out as to what the project could become, I guess, because it wasn't written down in stone what it was going to be, So that was, I think, what was quite interesting. It was sort of hard to know exactly when to fully commit to this thing because we didn't really know what it was until we sort of had those sort of very open-ended conversations. But yeah, it's a joy, and I'm happy where it ended up.
Raoul, you actually answered a question that I had originally written down, but I removed it because I really didn't want to put you on the spot. That question really was, on an intimidation level of 1 to 10, how intimidated were you? trying to, again, I will answer this question later, but carrying the legacy, extending the work, reinterpreting the work on a scale of 1 to 10, how intimidated were you when you embarked on this journey?
Yeah, I'm not sure I feel the need to kind of label it too clearly. I think sort of leaving it, I mean, that's kind of what's interesting about some of the things that are happening in the Web3 digital art space using blockchain technology is, there's a lot of comparison to kind of pre-existing modes of doing things, but they don't always necessarily fit. And I don't think there's always a need to get too exact in the descriptions of these things, too didactic. But in terms of the intimidation, yeah, large. But I mean, I guess, for a lot of other projects, you're dealing with things like big directors that have, complicated visions and very interesting ways of describing that. I think what was the most challenging, like I did a collaboration with another artist called Jia Aili, Chinese contemporary painter who's amazing, but I think the big thing is, because sadly Calder is not with us anymore, is how do you even have the conversation? And what was reassuring about that was starting to talk with Sandy. He's like, he just lives and breathes his grandfather's work and just understands it to such a beautiful level that there was a sort of, I think he made me feel very reassured in that process, because I was speaking to someone that could speak comfortably and deeply and emotionally about that work, and that felt that, okay, well, we're having a real conversation here. It's not just sort of trying to guess at what someone else was, I mean, look, I don't know, I'd have to ask Sandy that, how he describes his role in that conversion or conversation. But it was an interesting challenge, and I felt happy with it.
I would
That's
just call
amazing.
it fluid.
I love to see that process of collaboration between Raoul as well as the Calder Foundation. And I do want to dig deeper into that process in terms of what that collaboration looked like. But before I do that, I want to flip the earlier question to Audrey. I do see Li Xing and Sin, congratulations on your epic Christie's auction, by the way. For those of you guys who aren't following Sin, make sure that you do that. She really broke the art newswire a couple of days back. But I'm sure Audrey, you must have discussed it with Sin as you guys were embarking on this. Similar to me asking Sandy earlier on, what was the impetus or source of inspiration to bring Calder's work into Web3, and what did the Calder Foundation want to achieve? Audrey, why was the Calder Foundation, or why was Calder at the top of the list to be able to do something with TRLab? What was that source of inspiration or impetus for TRLab?
Well, I think that Sing and I met with Sandy last year during Art Basel in Miami, and at that time we didn't think that Sandy was interested in working with TRLab because we knew that he was quite skeptical about NFTs and a lot of what was out there. But we showed Sandy the conversations that were going on in our community, that we have a small community that is talking about art, that's very focused on getting more access into educational materials about art. And Sandy had looked at that and said, well, they should be talking about Calder. So, and I think for us, it's never been why Calder, because of our own biases. Like, I've loved Calder for so many years, and my mom's a big Calder fan too. And I thought that I knew a lot about Calder, and I was like, I really felt like this is going to change how TRLab would be seen in the art world, to being able to have the privilege and the honor of partnering with the Calder Foundation. But as we spoke with Sandy, and every time I met with Sandy, it felt like I was taking a test. And I think that may have been where the quiz idea came from, because I wanted to prepare for all of my meetings with Sandy, because I never knew what he was going to ask me about Calder, and I always didn't feel quite prepared enough. That there was so much more to learn about Calder, that if you didn't know about Calder before, there's obviously so much history and legacy there for you to learn. But even for someone like me, who thought that I was a big fan of Calder's, I knew very little under the surface. And so the collaboration really came together with a partnership being we would go back to Sandy with different ideas and concepts. We would show him what else is happening in the NFT space. And ultimately, we landed on really wanting to focus on education to take away from the trading and the other financial aspects of NFTs and really focusing on using blockchain to reward people who have spent time learning about Calder. And I think that was really just as the collaboration between Raoul and Calder Foundation, something that was very fluid between TRLab and the foundation that came together through our conversation and challenges with the foundation, with Sandy constantly asking me questions and me then wanting to amplify that experience of what it was like what was like interacting intimately with Calder's work into the Web3 world.
That's amazing. And Audrey, I'm so happy, and I'm sure that the entire TRLab community, as well as those in Web3 who look at art, are so excited that, again, you guys had the courage to approach the Calder Foundation. At the same time, are so grateful that Sandy and the Calder Foundation, decided to take on this opportunity to share Calder's work to the greater Web3 community. Now, I want to move on the line of questioning to really talk about the work itself. And when you look at digital art in the Web3 space or in the NFT space, you have several different ways of bringing art onto the blockchain, right? You have on the most base level, you have people or you have artists and creatives who create natively digitally, right? People who use the digital canvas all the way from start. And the process entirely is digital. So you have those group of people. You have people who are traditional physical artists who take their physical works, take a picture of it, take a 3D model of it, upload it onto Web3 as an NFT, and sell it as either a representation of their physical work, tie the physical to the digital, or even burn the physical so that there's only a digital, right? And then after that, you have another breed of creatives, right? That we've seen very aptly, I guess, with Cai Guoqiang, who TRLabs worked with in their initial drop, who leveraged their physical abilities to create something that was digital, that really embodied the digital, although it was created in the physical, right? So this question is actually for Raoul, but what was the process of manifesting Calder's work onto the digital canvas? And during that process, what elements of Calder's work were particularly important for you to capture?
I think there'll be, Sandy, I'm sure will jump in on this as well, because it was a bit about, wanting to have an anchor in the real world, like something that connects us to the original works that we're referencing here. Part of like context within the work, but then I guess I was interested in, if we're going to use a digital medium and we're making this, I'm making this on computers and displaying it in the digital space, that medium has to be taken into context. It has to be relevant to how I'm making it. So I guess I was curious as if you look at Calder's works, they exist within some form of limitations as they exist in the physical world. And if we exist in the digital world, we have a different set of limitations. So I was kind of curious in how you could explore the nature of those works without the same constraints, the same physical constraints. You're sort of changing the laws of physics somewhat. What if we see one of the mobiles evolve over time, and you're seeing that all at the same time? So you're sort of changing time, the temporal kind of nature of the way you look at something. Or we might look at, trying to build, like the constituent parts as forms of energy, as in like photons and light and energy, which is basically what you're actually seeing on a screen is electricity energy piped around and coming out. So I guess those kind of translations sort of helped sort of justify why we were using digital forms to make it. Like, it needed to be part of that story. That was some of my reasoning as I was going through it. Was there more to the question? Did I answer that?
Yep, that was a beautiful answer. And I guess we'll come back to the second half of that question. But Sandy, please go ahead.
I want to add to Raoul's description because, as you were saying, WhaleShark, artists who are not digitally native, from my point of view, they were basically parasites. There were very few artists who were doing anything interesting. They were basically just making images of their pre-existing work and then trying to mint them and trying to literally mint them, go to the bank with them. I found that super uninteresting, and I was really interested in even some of the very older artists like Lucas Samaras, who's working natively and making NFTs on Pace's platform. He's doing something, whether you like his work or not, he's doing something he's really working in his 80s towards the future of humanity. And I thought it was really interesting the way how Raoul's imagery, which is pure digital imagery, it's not like we shot some films of Calder's and he just like dumped them in the computer. He constructed all of that. So it's digitally native, purely digitally native, describing something that is beyond the image. So like Calder's work connects us to energies that are beyond the image or beyond the physical object. Raoul's work was connecting us to something beyond the image, which is, existing in this netherworld, the Web3 space or whatever you want to call it, the digital space. So it was really interesting amalgam of things that happened for me. Just my awareness became more heightened through the process of working with Raoul, of realizing how the digital image creates a whole new kind of human sensation. I just wanted to add that.
I absolutely love those answers, particularly your answer, Sandy, as well, because again, when you look at the space, there are ways for the physical to take form in the digital, and that not necessarily is, paints. I'm sorry to the painters out there, but painting on a canvas, taking a picture and uploading it. I mean, we've seen so much ingenuity. Not even with the Calder Question or with the Calder Works, along with other artists in the space who do so much more. Like, for example, Audrey, sorry, I'm going to segue a tiny bit, but talking about Cai Guoqiang when he did his firework pieces, again, what he wanted to capture on the digital is not the eventual piece, but rather the process, because that process of everything going on fire, right, or lighting up, can't be caught on the physical. So he identified that as a place. We've seen other artists like Skinny, and again, up and coming digital artists who said, all right, I can do it on paper, but what I'm going to do is I am going to do this on paper. After that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a video of me burning this artwork so it only exists in the physical. And then after that, tying that to the metadata of the physical, of the digital piece, even though it's physical, right? I think there's so many innovative ways to use this digital canvas. And Sandy, I'm in full agreement with you that probably the most boring way to approach it, really is to take a photo and upload it and say, hey, this is my NFT, right? So just a pointer to everyone out there. I mean, there are 1,001 ways for you guys to shift from the physical to the digital, to make it interactive, to make it immersive, to make it innovative. And, there's really a lot to learn from all of these areas as, the greats, as interpretations of the greats come on to Web3. Raoul, the second question that I actually had for you is really talking about, Calder's work. There's so many aspects to Calder's work that are important, right? And you talked a little bit about it, but I guess I would say, what were the main elements of Calder's physical work that you would say, you really had to retain or you really had to extend or accentuate upon as you brought it into the digital world? Are there any areas where you paid particular attention to?
I think there's sort of like a connective structure that runs through it, sort of like almost like a channeling of energy between the points of I guess, mass and gravity that connects all these elements. They all balance each other, and you just observe that naturally when you're standing next to a Calder work. So trying to kind of, I guess we're starting with a recreation as sort of a simulacra of those connective points, but sort of reducing it to sort of the elemental qualities. And then I think it was a little bit about like exploring how those things might move. So it's sort of like a combination of movement and shape and curve and energy, basically. It's a sort of slightly hard thing to explain, but I think those were the things I kind of wanted to keep as, the sort of DNA of the work that I wanted to kind of shine through and keep. But I guess on a secondary level over the top of that was, I guess, you have an emotional response for most people, I assume, when they spend some time with the Calder work. I kind of wanted to try to recreate that feeling, something like that feeling. I can only relate to my own feeling because it's very hard as humans to kind of express that kind of clearly to each other, how they feel when they're experiencing a work. But I guess I could only refer to my own experiences and try to keep that in these works, is like how to express the digital version of that, because we're not standing in a physical space. These are presented to us on 2 dimensions, at least at this point. So I wanted to express into other areas so that we could keep the emotional side of the work as part of it.
Raoul, that's a beautiful answer. And I'm going to flip the same question across to Sandy. Sandy, as you guys were going through drafts, going through concepts, were there certain areas of Calder's work where you were adamant that they had to be represented in as you collaborated with Raoul?
It's a great question. I want to go back a second to when you were talking about artists making digital copies of their pre-existing work and then minting them as NFTs. There in the Calder Foundation's exploration of the new space in the last number of years, I found the most distasteful activity were large museums taking images that were already out of copyright and taking them out of their flat files and scanning them and minting NFTs out of them. They were basically pirating stuff that was, in the public domain already. And I found that kind of the most offensive aspect of the, of the whole arena. I just want to add that because that was part of what informed us at the beginning of like where we really don't want to go. We saw what other people were doing. It was like, that really is what we don't want to do. Those kinds of things. That really feels so fraudulent in a way. There's nothing authentic. There's nothing real. There's nothing spirited about that kind of activity. Whereas the artists themselves were, or you have Tarantino minting pages from a script or something from a great movie he did. That's his property that he's putting out there in the universe. I think that's a lot better. I just wanted to add that to the commentary of kind of the impetus of the program. As far as like the collaboration with Raoul, I was when he first did his kind of like test image, I was totally floored. I usually have a lot of comments when I see somebody using the Calder image, on any kind of like product or any kind of use or any kind of publicity or any kind of thing. I have lots of comments, and Raoul's first proposal to the group was totally phenomenal. I was really, really kind of shocked. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to reply to it. I didn't know. I mean, there were like little things that bothered me, but they were just little tiny non-issues, really. Just where a wire was rendered kind of too thick. So if you look at the mobile itself and you look from the bottom to the top, you can see the mobile has wires that are skinny at the bottom and they get a little bit thicker and they get thicker and heavier at the top where all the weight's held. And I wanted Raoul to reference that to like as an impeccable degree. And I think we also sent him like crappy images to begin with that didn't even, help him in his work. Then we made a whole bunch of highly precise images, especially like where things connected and things like that, really detailed stuff, and fed that back to Raoul so he could put that in his brain and have it rendered in like a more precise and kind of the fluid elegance that you have in a mobile was what came out of that whole process. And as I'm sure everyone who's listening has already seen some of the images. The idea that he can work with energy, some people will interpret it as like the origin of the universe. Some people will interpret it as something even grander and bigger than that, which is, awesome, which is how I interpret it, sort of the energetics and waveform of everything, a source of everything, not just the known universe. Having them having those spots, those energetic forms coalesce into Calder's mobile and then dissipate was really, really exciting.
I love it. And again, I'm just so struck by the level of collaboration and the level of communication and I guess the level of the ability to get on the same page between Raoul and the Calder Foundation. But Raoul, I noticed that you unmiked yourself. Did you have something to add to that?
Oh, just a small detail. I think one of my favorite takeaways from this process is I have these very special videos that Sandy recorded with his team where he's gone through each of the works, each of the 5 works, and explained little details. And we've looked at the little joining points and then the overall mood and feel and the sound of tines. And, but they were just for me. I felt very like I was getting a personal tour of these 5 works that I have, on tape forever, which I wanted to thank Sandy for.
And no, WhaleShark, we're not going to mint those. Don't worry.
I was going to make the joke, but I didn't
yeah, I was
it's
just
not
about
gonna
to ask. You should mint everything, guys. So I know that we originally scheduled for 45 to 60 minutes, but this conversation is just so riveting. I'm very much enjoying myself. I hope you guys are as well. I just have 3 last questions for you guys. Are you guys okay to run slightly over time if these questions run a tiny bit long?
Yeah, no problem for me.
Fine by me.
Okay, perfect. Audrey gave me the heart. So I think one of the major questions that I had was essentially, and this is a question to all 3 of you. I'm going to give Raoul and Sandy a little bit of a rest first, and I'll start with Audrey, but this question will be asked to all 3 guests is, how would you really characterize these digital artworks? Are they an interpretation? Are they an extension of Calder's work? Are they paying homage to Calder's work? Audrey, how would you characterize all of these Calder NFTs that were launched?
Oh, that's a tough one for me to start with. I think I see it as a collaboration, and I see it as a work that, and I think Raoul put this much more beautifully than I can, that is taking the essence of how seeing a Calder sculpture in person can make you feel and bringing that into the digital sphere. So I think the best term I would use to describe it is a collaboration that is about getting insight into a sculpture, and rather than it just being it just being a replication or a video, or minting something that is just a record of something that happens physically.
Wonderful. And I will save Sandy's answer for last, but Raoul, asking the same question to you. As the creator, or as the artist behind this collaboration, as Audrey has put it, how do you view these digital artworks as it relates to Calder? Is it an extension? Is it an homage? Is it an interpretation?
Yeah, I think I kind of briefly mentioned before. I don't like to be too didactic about it, like too scientific as to how to describe exactly where it sits. But I mean, look, I'll take collaboration as a simple term for it, because what an honor. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, the process was. But I think artists are always sort of doing this to some degree. It's you have a feeling that is indescribable, ineffable. It's within you, and you're trying to translate that into a work that you hope kind of evokes something in the viewer, evokes something close to that. Essentially, we're all stuck within our bodies to some degree, and we want to communicate with the people around us and sort of share things. So we have language, but language often is a sort of, unless you're a wonderful poet, it's kind of the lowest common denominator. It's the thing that we have to all understand. Thus, the kind of point for art half the time is for us to feel something, to connect with each other in a real way. So I guess what I'm trying to do is translate that. So maybe you could call it a translation in a way, but it's a very personal thing, So I'll take collaboration, whatever you want to call it.
A beautiful answer. Again, translation, a collaboration. Sandy, as one of the only people in the world that is closest to Calder, having dedicated, I would say, your entire life to Calder at this point in time, how would you define what these digital art pieces are, of your grandfather. Are they an extension? Are they a homage? Are they a collaboration? Are they a translation? Are they? Is it a combination of everything? How would you classify these digital artworks?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't call him an homage. I think Raoul was being a little modest, but way beyond a translation. There's one of the things that Raoul deals with directors and the commercial world, and that's how he's made his money, most of his life. This was not a commercial project, and this was not like driven by an art director's view of what they were trying to achieve. It was, I had certain needs and wants. Some of them were expressed and some of them were not expressed. And Raoul had, of course, he had to be also true to himself. He had to be true to his heart. So it was really interesting how it was a community that kind of came together, and the sensation of it all coalesced in like describing the feeling, not even the feeling, like the reaction to a real time experience, and that's why I think they're really successful. And then, of course, the next question is, who are Audrey and Sin going to propose in the next? We're doing 4 sequences of these, and in the next sequence, I don't know that we're definitely not going to be able to do as an amazing job as we did this first round. Raoul just like totally blew me away.
Thank you, Sandy. You're too kind.
Absolutely love the love that's going on with this group. I mean, again, it's beautiful work. When I first saw it, when Audrey and Sin showed it to me, again, it totally blew my mind as well. And once again, it's difficult to pin down what exactly is it, right? When you collaborate, when you try to translate, when you interpret, works and feelings, as you guys mentioned, from the greats who have passed on. And this is not a question that I'm going to delve in now, right? I mean, one of the questions that I had on hand, but I don't believe that we have enough time for this, is really talking about, how would Calder have approached it, right? Which I'm sure would lead to another 1 hour, 2 hour discussion. But instead, what I'd like to do is, I have 2 final questions, right? What I'd like to do is go to a bigger question, right? In the documentary, Alexander Calder, Sculptor of Air, Calder says, "This is completely meaningless and useless. It's just beautiful. That's all. It can make you very emotional if you understand it. Of course, if it had some meaning, it would be easy to understand, but it's too late for that." Now, I'm going to start with Raoul, but based on that quote, right, what does Calder's work represent or mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, this is my problem with some of the work.
Wait, Raoul, just hold on a second. So the reason I asked WhaleShark about how he watched that movie, because he watched it in translation. That's actually not a proper quote from Calder. Like he didn't say that his works were useless or meaningless. He said that they have no utility and that they have no meaning. He didn't say they're meaningless. He said they have no meaning, meaning they have no specificity. They have no overriding intention from the artist to have you have a thought in your head. He wanted you to approach his work with an open heart and an open view and an open brain, and have your own experience with his work, like his work is an antenna that connects you to other frequencies, other places, other things, other meanings. So it's not that they're meaningless, it's that they don't have a preconceived meaning. So, and the uselessness, that came out because he was talking about, he didn't say they were useless. He said they had no utility, meaning he had to tell people early, this is the quote you're referring to is 1932. And he's basically saying, my abstract sculpture is hard to understand, but they're not toasters, hair dryers, like things that you would use in a house, because they were motorized contraptions that were balletic performative works that didn't depict an image that was a known image or anything. It was just from his head, shapes, forms, colors, moving in kind of a recomposable composition. So he realized people could be confused and think that like it had a purpose and it had a use. So I just had to finer tuned the question.
I
Now,
love that,
Raoul.
Sandy, and it really confused me when I heard him say that, right? But Sandy, thank you for that clarification. It's a lack of utility, right, Sandy, as you were putting forth. But thank you very much for that correction, because
His
it stuck me
encyclopedic
too.
memory again.
Raoul, please go ahead, my friend.
Yeah, lack of utility. That's a whole other topic. We're not talking Web3 on that. No, that was kind of how I interpreted. I hadn't heard the quote before, and obviously it helps with the clarification from Sandy. But I read it as what I think my interpretation of that is. I never think it's good for an artist to sort of explain. You never want to give something away. It needs to have some enigma, something ineffable to it. You don't want to kind of solve something for a viewer, otherwise it sort of takes the joy out of the experience. So, I mean, I think I don't like art that's too neat, that has kind of a very kind of clear one outcome of how you would experience the work. It has to, the gap there is in all art should have a gap in it, which is audience shaped. That there is some space for someone to come and add their own interpretation. So I guess I have my own sense of how I kind of reacted to the work and what I feel it's talking about, and I'm sure some of that seeped into my work, but the process is not explicitly sort of rational. It's more of you feel your way through the work, and you're kind of like, is this creating the emotional kind of, for me, like, it's hard to not make it sound cheesy, but like a sense of awe, a sense of wonder, or kind of wanting to know more about, the universe that we live in, not from a scientific point of view necessarily, but just a sense of the potential of the universe that we live in. Those kind of questions were sort of what I got out of the work and translated for me, I guess.
Beautiful, Raoul. And once again, I'm going to save the best for last, because I do want to hear Sandy answer the Calder question, or my Calder question at least. But Audrey, what does Calder's work mean to you?
I think what going through the Calder question has actually done for me is it's given me vocabulary to express how I felt seeing Calder's works. Like I've always just been, every single time I've seen a Calder exhibition or a mobile, I've just felt so drawn to his work, and I felt so moved by his work, but I've never had the language to describe how I feel. And I think now, armed with educational materials, including having read James Jones' essay on Calder and non-space, I better understand what his work means to me in the way that I can better describe it to people. But I think I'm still on this journey of, Raoul said it way better than I ever could, but trying to figure out what Calder's works means to me, I think will be a really lifetime journey, where every time I go back and learn more, I'm going to come away with new takeaways. But I think one of the quotes that I think about often that's in the James Jones essay is about how Calder's work is able to fill a space without occupying it, because there's not just space within the work, there's also non-space. So it's really, as Sandy said, the multiverse that Calder is bringing you into. I think it's just very hard to capture with any language.
Wonderful, Audrey. Thank you. And I'm sure, again, leaving that meaning to be interpreted for art is one of the most exciting things about collecting art and about viewing art. Now, Sandy, this question actually, dude, it was honestly crafted for you. Having immersed myself in Calder over the last 48 hours as well as prior, again, it was when I did listen to that quote, which was again mistranslated. Thank you for the rectification. From the person who is closest to Calder, from the person who has an encyclopedic knowledge of Calder. And I know this is probably a large question for you, as well as something that probably a lot of people have asked you. But what does Calder's work represent or mean to you, Sandy?
Well, I loved Audrey's answer, because what she was talking about, a learning curve, a lifelong learning curve about what it means, but she said what it means to me. Most people would try and explore art or an artist's body of work and try and figure out what it means. And I feel so successful in having wonderful people like Audrey get to the point of saying, I'm discovering what it means to me. And that is the goal here. That is the goal of this whole program, of this whole, the whole Calder question. What does it mean to you? And it's also, by the way, this isn't a test. It's not like you have to figure out in the most, deeply symbolic and spiritual way what it means to you. It could also just mean nothing. And that's cool too. Like, Calder doesn't speak to everybody. How do you like that as an answer?
I like that very, very much, Sandy. And again, I think just from your answer itself, it just strips away all of the pretentiousness that we see in the traditional art world, right? Sandy, you are immersed in the traditional art world, and again, when you go to a gallery, when you go to a museum, when you go to black tie events, and people are talking about the meaning of art, and trying to dictate what that artist has created. I think Calder is very much the people's artist because, again, his work is open to interpretation, and you're carrying on that legacy by saying, again, the meaning of this art, it's really up to you, right? There's no wrong answer. Go ahead,
And
Sandy.
it's not just interpretation, it's what is your interpretation in this present moment? And you might have an entirely different interpretation 5 years from now, or 5 seconds from now, or whenever, another point in your curve, in your life curve. And it's that kind of thing, that kind of growth factor, which is really about being human, being alive, being a sentient being. That's really, really meaningful. And that's really where Calder wants us to get to. You mentioned museums and black tie events and pretensions. The worst thing about museums, they're based upon a 19th century idea of artifacts in glass cases. They take them completely out of the context of the ritual or culture or meaning or whatever it might be. You don't experience them in their native way, in their truthful way. You experience them as as an artifact. And I find that incredibly disappointing. I love museums, don't get me wrong, and I go to museums a lot, and I especially explore things that are thousands of years old. I find them very, very fascinating. The cultures from prehistory, super, super exciting. But so we've been invited, and I'm going to Philadelphia tomorrow to break ground on a new project, an actual bricks and mortar Calder Center called Calder Gardens. It's not called Calder Museum, but it is a place to bring your body and experience Calder's work in real time, in a real place, with real daylight and real plants and gardens. We specifically are not calling it a museum because we want to sort of tune your brain before you get there that you're going to have a different experience than walking into the Met or MoMA, one of the great museums on the planet. That something else will happen, something else will occur, and you can just come and be quiet. You can come by yourself, amazing, sit, be quiet, meditate, do your thing, and be engaged with Calder's work in a space that is not an exhibition, not a place where it's like leads you by the nose through an explanation about some historical fact of the artist's life. That's exactly what it isn't. It's a totally new way to experience Calder, like this thing that Adrian Sin presented to us. Like, how can you experience Calder in Web3? We're doing this actual physical place. How can you experience Calder in a way that's much more meaningful, a closer way to what he was intending?
Beautiful, and truly carrying on that legacy that I see. I mean, again, I could be misquoting simply because, again, that documentary was translated into English, as well as it does come through the director's lens. But, when I did watch that biography, I mean, Calder's approach towards his art has always been the interaction with those pieces, whether it had been Calder Circus, which again, I would love to see on Web3. I don't know if you guys are planning that, his mobiles, or even the forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but the stables, and the ability to walk around it, under it, go around it, and it changes the perspective. You're interacting with it from a visual perspective, and there are so many ways to create that art with your line of vision. So I'm really excited about the way that Audrey, the Calder Foundation, are going to take this into chapter 2, chapter 3, which leads me to my final question. And I'm not really sure if you guys are able to share a lot about what's in the future. But why don't I start off with, why don't I pose this question to Audrey first, and then after that, Sandy? What's next for TRLabs and the Calder Foundation, my friend?
So as Sandy mentioned, this is just chapter 1, and we have a couple more exciting chapters planned. But two of the things that we want to get right in the next chapter is, one, we want to take feedback from the community of what they liked a lot about the process, whether there are any other whether there are any other elements we should add in before we really began mapping it out. Because for chapter 1, a lot of the decisions that we made with the quiz and everything, it was a proposal that we put forward that was really a big experimental bet that there were people who were interested in going through this type of educational experience. And now that we see that there are actually people who did spend a lot of time in doing so and have done well and have enjoyed the process, we really want to make sure that they're involved in thinking through where we bring this forward. And I think the second thing is we wanted to start with mobiles, but we also want to highlight a lot of other areas of Calder's works, including wire sculptures, including how sound making works are part of his legacy too. So this is really just the beginning.
Amazing, my friend. Sandy, are you looking forward to these future chapters of bringing Calder to a new generation? I would say a new generation and a new spectrum of art collectors that are now truly Calder fans.
Yeah, completely. I don't even think about them as the people who engage the program as even art collectors necessarily. I just think of them as highly intelligent people that can learn something about this amazing artist. Like the next chapter is wire sculpting, and people don't know that he invented that medium. I said it early on in the conversation. Like, he took a piece of wire, which is a commercial industrial material, not a precious art material, and he bent, twisted it, and formed it into volumetric, but actual portraits of people or images of known things, but really broke tradition and really disrupted. So teaching about that is super exciting, super, super exciting. And I think ultimately I've realized that my goal is to kind of create Calder ambassadors, that those 1,200 people that went to the trouble to do their studies and to go through the test, they know something more. They probably know more about Calder than any art history professor working in universities today, because they actually read something, they did some work, they did some study. It's so sad for me that these art history students are exposed to Calder in like 90 seconds in a review, kind of basically made up by the art historians. And it's the nonsense they learned 30 years earlier or 40 years earlier from their professors, who of course made up the nonsense. So it's a really, really amazing platform to get us to directly curate an experience of education and engagement.
I love it. Sandy, all three of you are truly inspiring. I mean, I haven't been on Twitter Spaces for a long while, but I've never been hyped as much as I have been for digital art as we move forward. Sandy, wire sculptures were one of my favorite segments of the biography that I watched, and I can't wait to see what you guys do with that. With that, we are running 12 minutes over. This conversation ran for 72 minutes. And I am, again, so thankful and honored that Audrey, Sandy, and Raoul agreed to allow me to come on to moderate this conversation, as well as provide some questions and hopefully insights that the audience got from this conversation today. Audrey, Sandy, Raoul, TRLabs, thank you so much for having me. And I do thank the audience for sticking in here and listening to more about Calder. Do make sure that you are following TRLab as well as the Calder Foundation extremely closely as they move into chapter 2. Sandy, I'm taking that next test. I'm going to watch a few more bad documentaries, and hopefully I'm going to be able to ace that test with 100. Thank you so much for everybody for swinging by. Audrey, thank you so much again for having me, my friend.
Thank you so much, WhaleShark. This is the best.
Thank you, WhaleShark. It was fun.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
Take
WhaleShark.
care.
Thank you, everyone. Loved it.
Thank you.